The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
Hello, welcome to a discussion with Redford Williams and Virginia Williams. I'm Gretchen Ronka, and my guests today are the authors of the book Anger Kills, 17 Strategies for Controlling the Hostility That Can Harm Your Health. Thank you for being with us today. You're on a month-long tour of the United States discussing a life-saving book. I was very interested, Redford, you are the Director of Behavioral Medicine at Duke University. Virginia, you're a historian. You've collaborated as a couple who's been married for 29 years on a book which is certainly on a topic that has a lot of impact, I think, on today's society. Much of your professional career, Redford, has focused on research pertaining to people's hostility, their aggression. Could you describe a little bit about that and how you decided to make it a little more popular in tone?
This research began actually in the early 70s when I was working on type A behavior, which is a term used to describe people who are always in a hurry, very aggressive and hostile, and very ambitious and involved in their jobs. And toward the end of the 1970s, it became clear that not all aspects of type A behavior were equally bad for the heart. And to make a long story short, what the research has shown is that people who are hostile are the ones amongst the type A's who have the higher risk of developing disease. People who are always checking the number of items in the basket of the person ahead of them in the supermarket line that says no more than 12 items. People who get frequently angry and people who express that anger overtly in aggressive behavior are the ones who are having higher death rates. I wrote a book about 4 years ago describing this research and also the biological pathways from this hostile personality to disease. And what's become clear in the ensuing 4 years is that people are ready to accept that hostility is bad for your health and may put you at risk for a wide variety of health problems. And what people want to know now is, how can I tell if I have this personality, and what can I do about it?
I was interested because you do include a little hostility questionnaire, which is based on the Minnesota Multiphasic test.
That's right.
And the very first question, a teenager drives by with the stereo blaring, how do you react? And I think that the descriptions you use initially are so common to each of us in our life, and as I read the book I thought, oh, he's describing exactly my reaction to some of these things. So obviously you have, I think, successfully taken something that's a serious research topic and made it accessible to a general reader.
And also it will enable people to see if they're in the 20% of the population who is at risk for health problems.
One of the things that happened to me in the process of doing this research over the years was that besides the research going on in the laboratory I was doing, I was also going through my life with Virginia and our marriage. And I began to realize as the findings emerged that people with a cynical mistrust of other people that made them always check after even close family members to make sure they weren't messing up somehow was actually applicable to me, because I would always be checking after Virginia when she was cooking and when she was driving, give her little instructions, you know, you're getting too close to the middle of the road or get further over and so forth. And after a while, it was easier for me to accept that at least part of the responsibility for some of the problems we were having interacting around cooking and driving was my own personality that was coming out of the research. And part of the impact on me was to make it a little bit easier for me to accept the idea of changing, because the kind of people we're talking about in this book are not your quivering, neurotic, nervous types. They're people who are proud of saying, I don't get ulcers, I give ulcers. And we need to let people like this know, and I'm one of them, so I'm not saying anything about other people that I don't own myself, that you have a personality that puts you in a high-risk group.
I think that's really one of the strengths of your book, because you are very frank without being too indiscreet about
not maudlin about it.
No, some of the situations that you worked out, and they are the kind of situations that happen, as you say, cooking or driving. And it was interesting to me too that your reaction to Redford's criticizing you for the episode of the damp laundry, for instance, after you'd had a long, hard day and didn't want to stay at the laundromat for another cycle. You became more silent, more sullen, more passive. So each of you kind of reacted to the other in a way that didn't help the situation at all.
And when we were first married, I would tend to react in that way because I would somehow think, at least at first, that something was my fault, that I had just messed up something. And then later I would become angry and sulk and eventually probably pout or not interact with Redford very well. I've learned over the years to ask for what I want more directly and right away, and to take whatever steps are necessary to increase the chances that he treats me well.
Well, and it becomes clear in the book too that if the person who is being hostile or aggressive doesn't get a reaction from the other person, you probably didn't know that she'd had a long day and some of those things. So
amongst the strategies that we include in the book are ones to help you be more aware of the other person, be more tolerant, more empathetic of the other person.
Because another characteristic of this hostile personality is that they are very self-involved and they're also not good listeners. So the chances that they will see their behavior as how from the perspective of the other person and will be able to see how they are being perceived by the other person is not as good as it might be. And one thing they can learn is to become more aware of how they're coming across.
And I think that's hard. Your point of letting people finish what they're saying before you interrupt, and the tolerance, the chapter on tolerance, I think can extend beyond immediate interpersonal relationships to how people treat each other in the workplace and in society as a whole.
And it can all build. You can begin with the listening strategy, learning truly to listen to another person. You can then go from that to learning how to put yourself in another person's shoes so you can see something from their perspective. And finally, you can work your way up to accepting other people as they are, not as you would like them to be, both in your personal life and maybe even in the world at large.
Now, all of this, I'm sure some of your viewers out there are saying, well, of course, I mean, it's trite. I mean, of course you should treat others kindly. I mean, what's so, you know, what's all the big deal?
Unless they get in front of you in the shopping line or in the wrong lane.
Well, yes. But what's the big deal? And the big deal is, I think here, comes from the research. And this is why the research is so important. The research shows that people who do count the number of items in the basket of the person ahead of them in the supermarket, people who do believe, because they don't trust them, not to try to sneak through with too many, people who frequently are blaming other people, people who have these frequent angry outbursts and who are getting angry and irritated frequently, have 4 to 7 times higher death rates. And besides that, unfortunately, if you have this kind of hostile personality, when you get angry, your blood pressure goes up more, your adrenaline levels go up more, and the damage is being done inside your body by these angry physiological responses.
There's a terrifying little description of that in here.
That's why it's not trite to try to do something about it.
And you also bring up the point that many people who have a hostile personality are also perhaps heavy drinkers, use a lot of caffeine, smoke, and have other behavioral characteristics that help or that impair health too.
Even though we probably still need to do more research in large populations to really nail down the hostility disease link, one thing that is, I think, now generally accepted by the medical scientific community is that hostility probably puts people at higher risk of having other risk factors. We published a paper last summer in the American Journal of Epidemiology showing that people who have high hostility scores at age 19 in college have more overweight, more likely to consume more caffeine, to drink more alcohol, and to be smokers when they become middle-aged in the 40s than people with low levels of hostility.
It was my impression that most of the research had been conducted on men, or am I missing?
There has been, most of the research has been done on men, but wherever we have data on women, and have followed up women where we have hostility information from in the past, there's one study actually that has done this, and women in every example of the research that's been done on men have the same bad effects from hostility. So for example, the women who had high hostility at age 19 are more likely to be overweight, to smoke, etc. at age 42 or so. I think the impact of hostility on the health of women will certainly be just as severe as it is in men, though women as a group start out from a lower risk level. But coronary disease is still the biggest killer in women, far and away more than cancer, despite our impressions, and the impact of hostility on that risk is probably significant.
Well, you also bring up the point that genetics can sometimes have something to do with the type of hostile personality you have. But we were talking before the program a little bit, and Virginia, you indicated that role modeling by parents or other adults who work with children is still one of the most effective ways of helping children learn how to control their emotions.
And yet another way for learning to control one's hostility is so that you can operate as a role model for your children to not blow up at every little thing. And also to not overreact to your young children who, when they are 2 or 3, may be throwing temper tantrums simply because they don't have many other items in their repertoire in terms of how to react. But if you will not give them positive or negative feedback, but simply let them be, by the age of 4 or so, they will begin to outgrow it. And if they see you learning to handle difficult situations with appropriate behavior, eventually they're going to come around. Now, when they're teenagers,
that's another
it may be
by the way,
you did have a teenager at the time you were writing this book, I believe.
the highest hostility scores on record are in 14-year-olds.
Interesting. Do you suppose that's the whole hormonal?
I think it may have something to do with hormones, and maybe for teenagers the world does seem to be a more hostile place than it does when they get older.
But if as parents you can treat them as gently and kindly, if consistently as possible, eventually they're going to outgrow it.
Something that is encouraging
Yes.
to all of us. To get back to the collaboration, it's interesting. You had not really worked together before you decided to take on this book. And
Not professionally.
Not professionally. And here you are touching a delicate subject, and I would expect you perhaps have different writing styles. You certainly have different personalities. How did it go? Did you have to take a retreat and lock yourself in a cabin for 6 months to do it?
Several retreats.
As it turns out, we had to learn to practice many of the strategies that we describe in the book in the process of writing the book together. I had the idea that I'm the expert. I'll give Virginia some assignments. She'll go check it out in the library and come back and write it up, and I'll correct it for her.
And my perspective was we each have written one book. We're coming to this as equal partners, and we're each going to contribute half to this new enterprise.
And so when Virginia started criticizing my chapters in the same way I'd criticized hers, I at first got very hurt, but then I realized that I had to look at this from her point of view, and we actually had many opportunities in the process of writing this book together to practice listening skills. I would have to force myself to keep my mouth shut while she was talking. Empathy, well, how would I feel if I were in her shoes getting criticized by me? And it did make it easier to work together.
And it's easy, rather glibly, to say that now, but it just underlines that in a new enterprise, you're really going to have to work on treating each other well, and it's not going to be easy, and that hostility control and learning to interact with your partner is a lifetime process, not something for which we can give you a quick and easy fix.
And progress is the most important thing. Progress rather than perfection. The largest benefit with exercise, for example, comes when you go from being a couch potato to at least just some regular exercise in terms of your decrease in risk. After that, going all the way to being a marathoner gives you a further benefit, but not nearly as big as that first step. So beginning now to do something about reducing and controlling your hostility, even if you don't become perfect overnight, if you just keep making little bits of progress in the right direction, will probably be good for your health and certainly good for your relationships.
Well, I like the way you emphasize practice a little bit at a time, and it does make it seem like it's more manageable than trying to change your whole life overnight.
And the two steps which are always necessary is for an individual to admit that indeed they do have this problem and therefore want to change, and then to commit themselves long term to changing, not that in any given incident that they may be able to control their hostility. A portion of the time they won't, but if they will just learn from that incident and say, next time I'm going to handle this differently.
And we're not talking about a complete personality makeover. Personality is very hard to change, perhaps impossible. But what you can do is you can change the behavior that your personality drives you to engage in. So the first thing we advise people to do with this kind of personality is when they're experiencing an angry feeling or maybe a cynical thought about someone, is to ask themselves 3 questions. Is this anger important to me? Is this situation important to me? Is my anger justified, and do I have a good response to it? Now, in the end of February 1993, there was the explosion in the World Trade Center. Lots of people got angry over this, called in talk shows, all upset. Most of the people who were all upset calling in with their anger were probably the 20% we're talking about. When they ask these questions, it's important? You bet. I mean, that's serious business. It could even happen here. Is my anger justified? Yes, indeed it is, because this is a terrible thing. Is there anything I can do about this? Probably not. So then what we advise people to do is to engage in a little dialogue with themselves, to try and talk themselves out of being angry. Oftentimes that'll work. Hey, I can't do anything about this. I'm just not going to keep this anger. Then you ask yourself another question. Am I still angry? And unfortunately,
a good portion of the time the individual will be. Then we have a series of quick fixes, what you can do on the spot if you can feel your blood pressure rising and this situation is getting out of control and you know that you're harming your body. You can distract yourself after you've reasoned with yourself. You can distract yourself. You can just silently scream at yourself to stop. If these don't work, and a portion of the time they won't, you can try on-the-spot meditation.
Not meditation for meditation's sake. It's important to practice it regularly so you get to be good at it. But use meditation, pay attention to your breathing. Every time you breathe out, say cool it, as an acute pill, if you will, that you take when you're angry and have decided you don't want to keep this anger going.
Well, and I think the chapter in your book that deals with meditation gives some very practical examples of how you can do this. Humor also is important, and from the very beginning of the book, you open right across from the title page, a very funny cartoon. And throughout the book, you have humorous little anecdotes as well as cartoons, which I think help the reader. If we can't laugh a little bit at our own personalities, it's an unfortunate sort of a thing.
And the kind of humor we're advising is when you make yourself or the situations that may temporarily be overwhelming you the object of your humor. We're not talking about bedroom, bathroom embarrassment, and we're not talking about veiled hostility where you take a group and make fun of them somehow, like women drivers, for example. But instead, it's yourself and how upset you are getting that the traffic is stalled. And instead, turn it into a situation that provokes your humor.
If you can make fun of yourself, you're well on your way to controlling to controlling your hostility. Humor is a way of adopting a more positive attitude, which is a more long-range strategy than these quick fixes we were talking about when you're angry. Changing your worldview from the cynical one to a more positive one. In addition to that, we think it's very important for people with this personality to have more positive relationships, to change their relationships to other people. And one that we think is particularly effective here is what we call the listen strategy. You don't have to completely do your personality makeover. All you have to do when somebody else is talking is keep your mouth quiet. Shut.
I'm trying.
And let them finish until they finish what they have to say. And when you do that, you give a totally different message from interrupting people. Hostile people are very involved in their own thoughts and will want to come in quickly with their brilliant association to what you just said. If you can force yourself to keep your mouth shut until someone else you're with has completed whatever it is they want to talk about, you will have a very powerful impact on the quality of your relationship with that person. And this is a strategy from the book that I would advise people who are viewing this to do. Pick somebody in the next 24 hours that you're around, and when they start talking, say, I'm going to do it now, and just keep your mouth shut until they have finished talking. See what it does. When we do this in workshops and we have people come back after a homework assignment to do this, your homework tonight is to go and do this listen strategy tomorrow. They come back with some wonderful stories.
And try to establish eye contact if you can while you're doing this listening. And the stories they come back with invariably involve how wonderful the other person was and how interesting they were and what a good time they had together. And this is true when we do an in-class exercise, whether the person is the listener or the speaker. Both sides, they feel they've gotten a lot from it. It's wonderful to be listened to as well, to have someone's undivided attention.
And that's something I think, particularly in work situations, everyone is trying so hard to get a point across that often only one side gets represented in meetings and so forth.
But the chances of your being effective, and people tell us this over and over again from the workshops too, hey, when I started listening more, I got listened to more and I was getting my points across more often.
Well, it's the respect, it's the tolerance that you speak about. One of the other things that interested me a lot in your book, you come right out with a whole chapter on the importance of religion for people who are trying to overcome hostile personalities. And of course you aren't advocating any religion over another, but often I think people skirt the whole issue of spirituality. A lot of people say that religion is the reason they are hostile, whatever training they had as children perhaps. How did you get to consider this as one of your 17 strategies?
Well, for one thing, there's much evidence that practicing one of the world's major religions is good for your health, that people who do so have better health records than people who do not. And it's an excellent source of social support. Chances are there will be some sort of prayer or meditation that will make you calmed and centered. And all of the world's major religions are going to have as a message to treat other people well.
Not the message, if you don't believe exactly as I do, you're going straight to hell. If you look at what Jesus taught, what is taught in Leviticus, and what even Confucius had to say about this, 2,500 years ago, they were saying the best way to be is to treat others the way you would like them to treat you. I really like the way Hillel put it. He was a rabbi who lived about the same time as Jesus, and he was once asked by a smart aleck, tell me, Rabbi, all the wisdom of the Torah, one sentence, let's have it, thinking he would trip him up. And what Hillel said was this: all the wisdom of the Torah is this: that which is hateful to you, don't do it to somebody else, to paraphrase. And he then said, that's all the wisdom of the Torah. Everything else in there is explanation. Very profound. When I was doing this research and using the hostility questionnaire to identify which aspects of hostility are bad, the cynicism, the anger, the aggression, I realized that what I was discovering, quote unquote, was the same thing I had been taught in Sunday school as a child. And when I looked into it more, I realized that what was coming out from this research was exactly the same lessons that we had been taught in our religious teachings, the core philosophy, the one that says treat others like you'd like them to treat you, for thousands of years.
One of the things I appreciated too about your book is a lot of self-help, and I think you're far beyond a self-help book, but focus so much on the individual, and one of your strategies is get out and become involved in some social causes, whether it's working with the homeless, whether it's working in a school library, and the idea of people decreasing this hostility level if they are working with others. I also appreciated your comment that the public library is a good place to go and look for places to.
That's right.
And that ties in exactly with the whole.
Again, so that you relate to others in as many ways as possible, and not only your immediate family and the people around you, but people that you probably would not come in contact with otherwise in your ordinary day, so that you learn to see them not as them and a group out there, but people just like yourself with wants and needs and foibles and good and bad parts.
Volunteering is a good way to increase your empathy and your tolerance.
A couple of the other suggestions you have is having a pet, that is
Yes.
very therapeutic.
Even if it's only a goldfish that you carry on long conversations with, it's
And
good
it's
for you.
a simple beginning to relating to others, but it's not for everyone, and we think it's important that you try on a particular kind of pet for a weekend before you make a long-term commitment, because some people will find their hostility is increased.
Yes, I think I'm perhaps one of those. Some of us need I think it's your final strategy, having a confidant, someone that you can trust, them that you can be very frank and open with and discuss all kinds of things, whether it's a spouse or a colleague at work, just a good friend.
Yes, amongst the heart patients we studied at Duke a few years ago, those with severe heart disease, those who said, "I had no one to share my confidences with," were 3 times more likely to have died within a 5-year follow-up period. 50% were dead, in comparison to only about 17% of those who did have someone that they felt they could share with. Sharing your concerns, talking about bad things with a friend is really a very effective way of decreasing stress. And by the way, talking about women, it's a way that women seem to cope with stress better than men.
It can also be a practical help. If you need someone to take care of your children temporarily, a ride to the doctor, someone to remind you to take your pills, and so forth.
We could spend a lot more time. I feel like I've had a half hour of good therapy. Thank you very much, Redford Williams, Virginia Williams, and thank you for joining us today on a discussion with Redford Williams, Virginia Williams, authors of Anger Kills, 17 Strategies for Controlling the Hostility That Can Harm Your Health.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.